and welcome to another podcast at Fulcrum. Fulcrum is the analysis and commentary website of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. I'm Hwok, a senior fellow with the Malaysia Studies program.
And I'm Francis Hutchinson, also a senior fellow with the Malaysia Studies program.
We are very privileged to have Khairy Jamaluddin with us today. He was a three-time member of parliament for Rembau, and he served as former Minister of Youth and Sports, Science, Technology and Innovation, and Minister of Health. And he's also a visiting senior fellow at ISEAS. Welcome, Khairy.
Thank you.
We have many topics to cover. Malaysian politics being dynamic, kaleidoscopic, and ever so interesting. So let's just dive in. Start with UMNO. UMNO has a storied history of figures being cast into the quote-unquote political wilderness. Most illustriously, Mahathir Mohamad, Musa Hitam, and Anwar Ibrahim. Tun Mahathir and Tun Musa returned to UMNO and worked their way up to the highest office. Dato Sri Anwar was banished and never returned to the party. He founded PKR. The rest is history. Now, those were different men at different times, but we cannot avoid noticing the parallels with your recent travails, Khairy. So let's kick off with this set of questions. What are your plans for the next 2 to 3 years? As we mentioned of you running for Menteri Besar in Selangor, even if that is no longer on the table, what prompted you to consider that position? And in light of the past political wilderness experiences, what are your aspirations for the next 10 to 15 years?
Thank you for having me on the Fulcrum podcast, and thanks for the very challenging first question. I have just gone through an extremely tumultuous last 6 months, in which I started off the 6 months as health minister in the Malaysian government. And I find myself here today as a senior visiting fellow at ISEAS, a former member of parliament and a former minister, lost in the general election and expelled from my party, UMNO. So the 6 months that has just passed has given me great food for thought about what my political future might look like, or rather the absence of a political future might look like. And I think it's safe to say that taking a leaf from some of the illustrious examples that you mentioned earlier, it's not certain whether the comeback will happen via UMNO or via another political vehicle, or even at all. And I think if I did consider initially coming back during the state election, or rather the set of state elections that are about to take place, I think I can say with now 95% certainty that I would probably sit it out. And the big reason is, I think, two major reasons. One is I cannot quite find a good fit for me to join a political party now. And I think, as I mentioned during my seminar, not many politicians are given a second chance to choose a political party, and you want to make sure that your choice counts and it's not something temporary or fleeting. And I don't think that I have enough of a perspective on the existing political parties to make a choice now. And simply by virtue of not having a political platform, that pretty much rules me out from the state elections, as independent candidates don't fare particularly well, especially at the state level. Second is more of a personal choice. I think having gone through those tumultuous 6 months, it's good to recharge. It's good to take a step back. It's good to spend some time at ISEAS. It's good to also pursue other endeavors. I do some corporate work now. I do some media work. I have a podcast of my own. And I think you should only go back into politics when you have clarity of thought and purpose about what platform you want to be attached with, and not for the expediency of choosing a platform simply because you want to contest at the next available elections.
And you've been frank and outspoken about UMNO's current state, and you've been critical of Zahid Hamidi's presidency, as well as the party leadership's decision to seek a pardon for Najib. You seem to be, offering constructive criticism. Are you hopeful at all that the party can change and pivot towards being more principled and forward-looking?
I think it can only change once there's a clear rupture from the past. And I don't use the word rupture lightly, but it has to be a rupture, not just a break, because as much as we think that we have broken from the leadership of Najib Razak after the last general elections in 2018, but much of his legacy remains. In the form of warlords, in the form of his supporters, and also in the form of Zahid Hamidi, who was Najib's chosen successor. So there really needs to be a rupture in a sense that these individuals who represent either the present leadership or the power behind the present leadership need to really exit stage right or left and exit properly. And until and unless that happens, you're not going to see the sort of reforms within UMNO. As I've explained, that in UMNO, there is a cult of the presidency. And the cult of the presidency puts and centralizes a lot of power, both official, legal, and ostensible persuasive powers within the presidency, which leads to a very, very servile and obsequious party membership. And until and unless there's a new leader who's willing to challenge that and curb his or her own powers as the president, then you're not going to see real change. I mean, I'm vocal simply because of one fact, that after having presided over the most disastrous elections in UMNO's history, left with 26 seats in parliament, there is no accountability by the president. And that sort of brazen irresponsibility can only take place in a party which has institutionalized this cult of the presidency and to save the president at all costs, regardless of what the facts on the ground are.
Let's pivot a little bit to questions of policy and ideology. You have advocated for moderate politics and centrist policies, and you've said that UMNO has led Malaysia from the middle, and that has served the country well. So now in the wake of GE15 and the Pakatan opposition and a depleted UMNO, what is the future of moderate politics and centrist policies? And please take your time to expand. And this is a very broad, sweeping question on economic policy, but of course, will be a lot of interest as well from the perspective of race and religion.
Of course, when we talk of UMNO's position from the center, it does not mean that that position is devoid of the politics of ethnicity and the politics of religion. UMNO has its own raison d'etre, of course, is to ensure that the Malay community, the Muslim community, as well as the nation at large, there's advancement for all three buckets. But I would always argue that whilst UMNO's politics is racial, in a sense that there's a clear agenda for the Malay community and the Muslim Ummah in Malaysia, but it has never been racist. So that's the fine distinction. And this is a reality of Malaysian politics. Many people have come to me and said, centrist politics should surely be politics that is devoid of race altogether, or ethnicity altogether, or religion altogether. And my simple answer to that is that that would be unrealistic, because Malaysian society, whether it's the Malay community, Chinese, Indian, Kadazan, Iban community, will almost always resonate with issues which are important to their individual communities. And this is not mutually exclusive with having a peaceful Malaysian political system and a peaceful Malaysian society. That's, I think, the complexity of Malaysian politics and society, which Malaysians are used to. We can at once be advocating for the advancement of the Malay community, the Chinese community, Indian community, Kadazaniban community, but at the same time, understand that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, and that it can all square nicely with national unity and, of course, development for all Malaysians. So I do believe that there is still that huge room in the center of the spectrum for a party to occupy. Now, with UMNO having been seriously damaged and its support depleted at the last general elections, it remains to be seen whether Pakatan Nasional can play more of that centrist role, or it continues to drift to the right from time to time, and the line between ethnic concerns becomes more racist or more exclusivist or more ethnocentric politics that is of perceived threat to others. And it is a fine line, and it's a line that sometimes is very blurry, because once you do speak about ethnic concerns and religious concerns, then obviously the line from what is legitimate expectations to the line where it is perceived as being a threat to other communities can become very blurry. And it's something that UMNO has always worked on. Sometimes we stay on side, sometimes we are off side. But the tendency for Pakatan Nasional so far has been where they have tended to drift more towards the more concerning form of identity politics, rather than one that mirrors or responds to the legitimate expectations of the Malay community. It's one thing, for instance, in Parliament saying that, we want to see more Malay SMEs getting support in terms of grants and loans, to a more exclusivist message of saying that we should curb the support given to other communities. We should question the amount of money that's been given to Chinese independent schools. So you can see where the line is there. One is a positive affirmation of legitimate expectations, and the other one is a direct questioning of assistance perhaps given to other communities.
Could I just quickly follow up on that, and about the current administration, the unity government, Anwar Ibrahim administration? I mean, how do you see them negotiating this at the moment? They have had decades-long stances, right, about need-based policies and coming from multi-ethnic parties and so on, and yet they're kind of in a bind, having to be consistent with that, but then also address the concerns of especially the Malay community. How are they doing in striking that balance?
So the short answer to that is that they're not doing that well, or as well as they could be doing. And that's been reflected by some of the comments that I made during the seminar, as well as survey numbers that hopefully will be published very soon, to say that the Malay support for Anwar and for Pakatan Harapan, although it has increased since the last general elections, but it has not been decisive in a way that perhaps if you were to have general elections tomorrow, Anwar would be able to get the biggest share of Malay support from the community. And that's largely because I think the Malay political psyche, or the Malay political worldview, has been used to having Malay leaders who are quite explicit about the Malay agenda, so to speak, in a sense that, yes, when Anwar speaks of a needs-based policy, he always qualifies that by saying that when I help the poor based on need, the biggest beneficiary of that assistance program will be Malays, simply because amongst the lower income group, the Malays are the biggest numbers. The biggest number of people within the lower income group are the Malay community. But that's not enough for the Malay political worldview or psyche, because they can't appreciate that nuanced view, one. And secondly, they would prefer a Malay leader who explicitly says, yes, I will help everyone regardless of poverty, but I have a clear Malay agenda. And following from that, it's not just about needs-based needs-based policies in the Malay community. And I'll give you an example. So when Anwar speaks of poverty eradication, that's a no-brainer. It's needs-based, regardless of ethnicity. But within the Malay political or Malaysian political economic institutions, there are so many agencies that have been created to assist with the advancement of Malay economic development that has very little to do with poverty eradication or need. This, you're talking about established Malay businesses who want to scale up from perhaps a medium-sized business to a public listed company or to becoming even an international company. That's not really needs-based, is it? I mean, that's really advancing those who have already penetrated the middle class. So the narrative of needs-based and poverty eradication and helping the poorest and therefore uplifting the Malays as a result of that doesn't quite wash there. So that really needs an articulation of a Malay vision, which I don't think Anwar has ever done. And I've always questioned Pakatan Harapan, Pakatan Harapan and PKR, saying that yes, I completely understand your views on a needs-based approach. That's something that is that we can all agree upon. But what about the post NEP extension institutions that exist that have nothing to do with needs-based policies, that are there to assist the Bumiputera commercial class, the professional class? So that's something that's lacking, and that's something that always lights the fire under the Malay community by demonstrating a leader that has a plan beyond needs-based poverty eradication. And that's what something that I think is still missing with Anwar. And sorry, just the last point. It's not that this is alien to him. He presided over a lot of this in the 1990s when he was Minister of Finance. So he knows exactly what is required.
Your latest Fulcrum article of the 12th of April touched on Pakatan Harapan's difficulty in shoring up Malay support in general, but especially for the upcoming state elections. And I mean, we've been citing research done by some of us from ISEAS, looking at the percentage of Malay support that Pakatan Harapan got in G15. So how do you think Pakatan Harapan in general and PKR in particular can expand their traction among the Malay community, number one? And number two, what are your thoughts on what would be a realistic target of the Malay vote in terms of proportion? 30%, 40%?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to that clear articulation, which is still lacking. And I know that Anwar must be at pains to decide whether or not he tries to articulate a more general vision for the Malay community, because I'm sure that he's very wary that that goes against some of his own personal projection over the last few years, as well as perhaps even jeopardize his strong support amongst the non-Malay community, which he enjoys almost unchallenged as far as the Malay national leader is concerned. So I do think that it starts with that. And I do want to clarify my point. It's not just about, helping or having programs and a vision for big Malay businesses. It's also, your Malay working class who are not below the poverty line. And this is the majority of people in Malaysia. So what are the special programs for them? It can be couched in non-ethnic terms, but that reassurance is very important. And as someone who's been involved in Malaysian politics for more than 20 years, I do understand that the Malay community responds to that kind of branding, that kind of reassurance that comes with a special focus. And you can see that from Mahathir's time, last time, and even through to Najib's time. He presented himself as more liberal, but clearly had a section in every budget for the Malay community, which interestingly Anwar didn't have in his first budget. So I think Anwar has to reconcile that, has to figure out, how can I be more to everyone, at the same time. And perhaps he's wary because that was a constant criticism in his career, that he tried to be everything to everyone, much like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. But I think, in order to address his Malay problem, his Malay dilemma, so to speak, he does have to stretch a bit and try to cover the spectrum. And by doing that, and by demonstrating as well on the ground that they are no less capable of representing Malay constituencies, so your suburban constituencies, your semi-rural constituencies, I think that will go a long way in convincing Malays that they can support Pakatan Harapan, and Pakatan Harapan will safeguard their interests. So, for instance, it's very important that Anwar sits down with partners like DAP, who have traditionally been used as a lightning rod of criticism in the Malay community, that DAP members of parliament, DAP state assembly people are seen to be on the ground serving all communities. So very, very basic example of having your DAP member of parliament, whether they are Chinese, Malay, or Indian, especially if they're non-Malays, being seen on the ground and helping the local mosque, the local Muslim community, that allays a lot of fear, and that can be amplified, of course, by saying that, look, all these preconceived notions of DAP and Pakatan Harapan are not true. So it starts with Anwar's own vision, Anwar's own narrative, or Malay narrative, so to speak, and not be shy about that Malay narrative. I think sometimes Malays are frustrated and they feel that Anwar is almost embarrassed to talk about the Malay agenda, but talk about it in ways that are not threatening, that are inclusive, that are national in nature, but also on the ground to ensure that your weakest or perceived weakest link, like the AP members of parliament, are seen to deliver on the ground. So if you can successfully demonstrate that over the next 2 or 3 years, and I don't think the Malay share of support will dramatically increase at the state elections because the time frame is too short. And as many people have said, I disagree with the term green wave, but there's certainly a PN wave going on, and that those ripples will still be felt at the state elections. But what Anwar should target would be at least 30% of the Malay vote by the next election, if not 40% of the Malay vote. And that's not easy because it's trifurcated right now between Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Nasional, and Pakatan Harapan. So 30 is a good target.
So state elections are coming up, including 2 states that you will know very well, Negeri Sembilan and Selangor, former home and I suppose new political base. How do you see the PHBN Unity government playing their cards and strategizing their seat allocations and campaigns, especially in these 2 states, Selangor and Negeri? And how will you characterize PHBN's chances of making inroads in the northern states?
So let's start with the northern states first. I think it would be a landslide win for Pakatan Nasional, in particular PAS, in Terengganu, Kelantan, and in Kedah, for the simple reason that I think those steps that I mentioned about Anwar's confidence building measures in the Malay community hasn't taken place yet. And I think there is general rejection of both UMNO and Pakatan Harapan amongst Malays in those states. Familiarity with PAS. I think despite the best efforts of Pakatan Harapan in demonstrating that there are water problems in Kelantan and Kedah, infrastructure problems in the northeastern crescent, but voters there are not biting and saying that this is largely the legacy of underinvestment from Putrajaya all these years into the northeastern states, and therefore we're quite happy to continue to give our support to PAS and to Pakatan Nasional. So I think status quo in those 3 states. The only question is if it's going to be a wipeout, total wipeout for UMNO, just 0. And I think it's safe to say at this point in time that Kelantan will be close to a wipeout. Terengganu has naturally been a swing state. They've oscillated from PAS to UMNO to PAS since 1999. But the last election bucked that trend, and PAS has entrenched themselves in Terengganu, and there's no strong alternative leader in Terengganu from UMNO or from PKR for that matter. So I think it's going to be quite disastrous for PHBN in Terengganu as well. Kedah has been a frontline state, largely due to the polemic surrounding the Menteri Besar, who's been singled out by Pakatan Harapan supporters as an object of ridicule, but who has taken it on the chin and actually turned it into his advantage. And I think he will deliver a resounding win for Pakatan Nasional in Kedah. My view is that Penang Island will stay status quo due to the demographic nature of the Penang state seats as being majority Chinese seats, strong supporters of DAP and Pakatan Harapan. However, 5 seats or more in the mainland will fall to Pakatan Nasional, and this will track with general election results where seats like Kepala Batas, Pak Las old seat, Pematang Pau, Anwar's old seat, fell to PAS candidates. So I don't think the ground has shifted significantly in the last 6 months for that to be safe Pakatan Harapan seats anymore. Now, the big question is, of course, Selangor and Negeri Sembilan. Now, having looked at the numbers and, even accounting for 50% of a shift from Barisan Nasional to Pakatan Nasional, simply because a lot of Barisan Nasional UMNO supporters will not continue to support UMNO or will not give it to Pakatan Harapan. They'll throw their votes to Pakatan Nasional, which is what happened in GE. Even factoring that in, that's not enough for Pakatan Nasional to go over the top and win either state. So I would call it a status quo in both Selangor and Negeri Sembilan, but I would say that Pakatan Nasional will make some inroads into Selangor from their present position. They may get more than 10 seats if things are aligned properly. Now, the other question that was asked was how the seat allocation will take place. This is an interesting question because obviously, unlike the present unity government, this time around, it will be a pre-electoral arrangement in a sense that they will go into the election and decide that it is a 2-cornered fight, BNPH versus Pakatan Nasional, rather than a 3-cornered fight. We'll sort it out after the elections and we'll come together in a post-electoral arrangement. So it's a pre-electoral arrangement, and they're having a convention sometime later this week to formalize all of this. So the position from Pakatan Harapan is that UMNO status quo, meaning you stand in seats in which you won, which will leave UMNO with, I think, something like 3, maybe in Selangor, whereas UMNO has designs for up to 15 in Selangor. But Pakatan Harapan also fairly says, what basis would you want to claim those 15 seats? Because let's be serious and let's go on the basis of the past election results. Now, Zahid Hamidi, president of UMNO, has said we can't use previous election results. We have to use something else, and he's not quite said what that something else is. So it remains to be seen how they divvy up the seats. I think much the same in Negeri Sembilan as well. They'll go for status quo, which will mean that if the status quo also remains in the election, PKR will become the Menteri Besar. Selangor, if the only question is not so much the seats, the status quo, but the seats that were contested by Bersatu. So those seats now are up for grabs, because in the past Bersatu was with PKR PH. It's all a bit complex. So now that Bersatu is out, then Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan will have to decide who stands in those Bersatu seats. Now, there's been some indication of a compromise saying that UMNO will get the seats that they want, not many, in Selangor, and UMNO can have first dibs on the Bersatu seats, which will also be an uphill task because it's likely to still stay with Pakatan Nasional, Bersatu now with Pakatan Nasional. So that's the lay of the land, unless UMNO can demonstrate that they are strong on their own and that they bring value into Selangor. I don't think PKR will budge very much. Now, the big X factor here is the speculation around my good friend now the Minister for Investments, International Trade and Industry, Tengku Zafrul. Will he contest in Selangor? It's likely that he'll contest in Selangor for the simple reason that his political clock runs out in 3 years. He's a senator and he's only got 2.5 years left on the clock. And if he doesn't move to a state seat, that means he will no longer be a minister in the second half of this parliamentary term. So speculation is rife that that is the big bargain in place, where UMNO accepts perhaps less seats than the 15 that it imagines, but Zafrul is given a safe seat, and Zafrul will be one of the names given to the palace for consideration if the NPH wins for the Menteri Besar of Selangor. That's an exclusive.
Thank you. In your first Fulcrum of March 8th, you gave the 10th Prime Minister, Anwar, a good passing grade. Beyond the state elections in the second half of 2023 or even 2024, what do you see as his main opportunities and pitfalls? What sort of critical junctures could there be that could either increase his, shall we say, staying power or decrease it?
So I gave him a good passing grade because he managed to do something that was extremely difficult, which is to cobble together an arrangement now called the unity government, and he was able to keep it intact. And I don't think we should underappreciate that achievement. It required a lot of compromise, it required a lot of wisdom, and it required a lot of political skill, which only I think Anwar could have done. So on that basis, I have given him a strong passing grade for the first few months. Now, of course, once we get past the state elections, and I will categorize the state elections as a mini referendum, simply because this is the first time that voters will be able to choose for PHBN. Previously, it was a post-electoral arrangement, but now since it's a pre-electoral arrangement, this is the first time you're going to test the support for this arrangement. So it is a referendum for this arrangement, BNPH, and to see whether or not there's longevity for the next election. So both PKR, PH, and BN will be looking to see whether or not this is an arrangement that could be an arrangement that lasts for the next GE. So once this is done, then the benchmark for Anwar's performance will have to shift to other things. So I think the first thing is keeping the government intact, passing grade. Next one is the state elections, to see how well he does, to see the acceptance of this arrangement, and to see the early acceptance of his government. Of course, 6 months is a bit early to draw conclusions, but unluckily for Anwar, there are 6 state elections, and you can't tell voters don't make a decision based on Anwar's performance. Of course they are. It's the first test, and to them, they're not going to say it's 6 months, they're not going to say it's 3 years. They're just going to say, I have a chance to vote, and part of the reason for choosing will be Anwar's government's performance. So once he's done with the second hurdle, which is the state elections, then he needs to get down to the brass tacks of actually demonstrating that he can make the sort of reforms that he wants to. A lot of things have been KIV, have been put on hold simply because of the calculation of the state election. So if there are reforms that he has put on hold in terms of the economy, for instance, fiscal reforms, to looking at increasing government revenue, perhaps the reintroduction of value-added tax or consumption tax, looking at pension reforms, looking at rationalization of subsidies. These are things that have been kicked down, cans that have been kicked down the road simply because of the state elections. Now, after the state elections, no more excuse. The general elections are 4 years away. So really, the next grade or the next test for Anwar will be once he's safely through the state elections, and if my prediction comes through, which is status quo 3-3, then he really must demonstrate that he has the political will to make these changes. And if he doesn't, then obviously that will be a wasted opportunity.
Could you quickly address this question as following up on the last two that you've talked about, which is some PH leaders, right, have said words to the effect that they want to strengthen UMNO, and obviously strategically, right, the coalition, this very broad coalition, does need that, or the perception, the belief remains that we need a strong Malay party. But from what you shared about the outlook for the state elections, they're not really going to budge as far as the seats. So in what ways do you think that they will proceed with this sort of strengthening UMNO as, you know, a key component of the UMNO as key component of the coalition?
So they won't budge, in a sense, they won't budge out of the seats that they want, PH1. And those are largely the urban seats and the suburban seats in Selangor and also in Negeri Sembilan. What they want to see now is whether UMNO can bring value in UMNO's traditional strongholds, and that's your rural seats. That's the test. So, you know, for PH, and if I'm Anwar or if I'm in PH's shoes, testing UMNO is not giving them a safe urban seat where they will ride off the back of PH support and get a free ride to victory. Testing them is to see if they can reclaim the seats that they have lost to Pakatan Nasional. So I do believe that PH is testing UMNO now. They will have a better view of this after the state elections to see if UMNO is competitive, or once again competitive in their traditional strongholds. But if UMNO, again, as I said, if it's a wipeout for UMNO, then there will be some serious thinking. Let's remember that the reason why they are in bed with UMNO now is not just for the short-term instrumental gain of forming the government and Anwar becoming prime minister, but because they want to cross the line at the next election by having a Malay party, a Malay vehicle that can win your rural seats. That's traditionally UMNO's strength. But we know for a fact now, after the general elections, that UMNO failed at that. Of course, they have 26. That's a small number, but Pakatan Harapan must be hoping that UMNO can deliver at least 40 to 50 seats. And if the state elections show that it's a wipeout from UMNO, then you know, Pakatan Harapan has to ask themselves the very, very difficult questions. Yes, thank you for delivering us the government. Thank you for making Anwar prime minister. But are you really able to add value to us, or is UMNO, as presently led and constituted, going to be a liability for us?
Thank you for that. Now we're heading to wrap up now, and it would be appropriate to end with a question that is a bit more very forward-looking, and I think addressing the whole mix of the kind of thoughts and emotions swirling around Malaysia. There's a unique blend of hope and despair, I think, in these times. Optimism about the unity government, but there's also pessimism about compromises made and a sharp division between this broad governing coalition and peninsular all-Malay opposition. How do you make sense of the country's outlook? And in what areas is Malaysia heading in the right direction, and what areas is Malaysia heading in the wrong direction?
I think we're at a time of great transition because of the shifting political landscape. Now, we're not certain which political configuration will hold until the next general elections, and post general elections, we're not quite sure what political configuration will emerge from that. We're not sure which coalition, or is it a combination of people or groups or coalition which will form the next government. And that obviously is, there is a distinct disadvantage to that because it calls into question political stability. But I would prefer to turn that on its head and say that, you know, this is a transition, this is a new Malaysia, and this is a time for the government as well as the opposition to support the strengthening of institutions, knowing full well that political parties may end up getting at best a plurality of support, not a majority of support. That's where everyone has to work together to say that when there is a situation where there is only a plurality of support, the institutions safeguard against political instability. And those institutions can be laws, can be regulations, can be parliament, can be a good relationship with the palace, understanding that these are the lines and these are the responsibilities of the palace and of the political system and the institutions of civil society. So I think that's a positive, because it's the maturing of the Malaysian society, and to show that the Malaysian political system is resilient enough to continue and to be able to form governments in a stable manner, regardless of whether someone wins a majority or wins a plurality. So yes, one can view it as an extension of political instability, but for me, in a hotly contested political system, I think it's better to focus on institutions, on the strengths of the civil service, on the strengths of making sure that regardless of what the outcome is, that there is an understanding that everyone is committed towards stability, and the rules are clear to everyone. That Parliament is the place where you test your majority and your support. And we've put things in place like the anti-hopping legislation to make sure that things are a bit more stable. So I do feel that, yes, there is great trepidation when one looks at the political system. I don't foresee that there will emerge a party, at least in the next political cycle, that will score an outright win for now. And because of that, I think people should focus on deepening and strengthening those institutions. And this speaks to my other concern, which is more economic and regional, in that Malaysia deserves to play a much bigger role regionally. I think we have traditionally punched above our weight, but a lot of that has been jeopardized because of the political instability of the last 5 years. And many observers value Malaysia's calming presence in the region, together with other countries, some of the major countries in ASEAN. And I think that can only take place once you have clarity and certainty politically, even if you don't have an outright winner. And also for Malaysia's place economically, without having a prime minister and a government with a clear narrative about his economic vision, then we will be on the losing end of an increasingly competitive ASEAN economic landscape.
Thank you very much. It has been really, really comprehensive. We've looked at national level issues, we've looked at state level issues, we've looked forward in the immediate term, medium term, long term, and we've also looked within UMNO. We've looked sort of a little bit more broadly at Malaysia's political panorama. And so it really has been very enlightening for us. Thank you very much for joining us for this session of Fulcrum podcast. Thank you.